In this world, there is only power, and those wretched enough to go after it. This power, in the human realm, is known by the name of money, and as for those who run after it, for cash, they kill, abuse, and betray. From the suffering of others, they create wealth. Not everyone is like that, and most earn their wages without hurting a fly. But this video doesn't concern itself with virtuous people. Today, our destination is to be found within the abyss of human consciousness, using the manga YuYu Hakusho as a means of transportation. In a universe that concerns itself with yokai, understand demons, it always struck me as odd to notice that most of the darkness was in fact coming from actual people. Tarukane is one of them, a man who built his fortune by torturing a non-human whose tears turn into jewels, making her an unlimited source of riches. There is an evident problem here. Looking at their faces, you would have never guessed their true nature. A detail that adds to the confusion, as the monster doesn't look so monstrous, while the human is nothing if not villainous. Evidently, he treats her like an investment, but it isn't because of her birth. If a human had a similar capacity, he would abuse them all the same. Darkness doesn't discriminate. Monsters in this fictional universe just so happen to be born evil, but humans can easily partake in and even surpass their wickedness. This is because the god that they worship is the same: money. It surpasses tribalism and allegiances, leading opportunistic agents of the dark to betray their own species in pursuit of monetary gains. For a demon to behave like that is expected, as they have no moral compass. But what about humans? Those who abandon theirs for the sake of power could be said to be more sinful, as they made the choice to exercise their free will in nefarious fashion. It then comes off as logical for them to be not only active actors, but also pioneers of parallel business dealings, as money is a concept specific to us. Monsters have no use for it in their world, as monetary systems exist to facilitate exchanges of goods between people, which is worthless for a species that scarcely engages in trade. This means that someone had to introduce them to the idea, setting them up to be exploited by their new perversion. Money can't buy happiness, but it can purchase pleasure, hence why it isn't surprising that demons will also join in on the fun, as they are slaves to dopamine just as much as we are. The more one engages in capitalistic hedonism, the easier the means to access their fix becomes. If a pile of cash is enough to satisfy a grunt, its masters are not so easily quenched, all of the existing means of entertainment having been long exhausted by their insatiable thirst. Enormous wealth leads to depravity, an idea represented by the members of the Black Book Club, whose last source of enjoyment resides in organizing death matches between demons and humans to bet on the outcome. They are the real villains of the story. The monsters they hire to do their deed only accessory to their plans. In a story containing flesh-eating creatures, iniquity still somehow emanates from humans. The divide between the world of shadows and that of mankind is blurred. A simple glance cannot reveal where one starts and the other ends. Under this bizarro reign, the sight of a young boy apologizing to a monster serves as a testimony to that imbalance, with the death of its tormentor symbolizing the fate that awaits anyone crazy enough to gamble with these powers. The business of slavery and Mandingo fights, as told within the pages of YuYu Hakusho, are introduced in these terms, leading up to the announcement of an event that serves as the culmination of all malevolent business dealings happening in the underground tunnel connecting the two worlds. That event is the Dark Tournament, and this documentary recounts its history. The organizers of the tournament are known as the Enkoku Bujutsukai, a fancy name to describe what is essentially a crime syndicate. They have vested interest in the results of the tourney, as each of their own men join the competition. Whoever manages to make it to the finals and win earns a wish that the owner of the victorious team claims for himself. Fighters content themselves with the satisfaction of having destroyed their opponent, for the lucky few that manage to still be alive when the dust settles. While the Yukai do get their fill of blood, it is undoubtedly the humans that benefit the most from the Dark Tournament. Members of the Black Book Club and businessmen of their ilk understand the propensity for violence that their pets possess, making it easy for them to utilize these traits to organize yearly contests that reinforce their standing, while allowing them to rejoice at the sight of death and gore. To those battling in the arena, the tournament is only a way to prove their strength. The participants are either unaware of the strings tugging on them or choose to ignore it in favor of the pleasure they find in combat. The only spirits fit to escape that manipulation are unaffiliated demons or humans, both being rare demographics, for humans lack the power to fight and demons lack free will. Death usually concludes every Dark Tournament match, with the rare exception of out-of-bounds TKOs. Yukai rarely missing an opportunity to kill their opponent, survivors are infrequent, a state of affairs that neither the Enkoku nor their fighters seem too concerned about. The monsters under employ are expendable, and they themselves feel no allegiance to the collective, their only concern being about the survival of the self, not the preservation of their species. If the tournament's supervisors are allegories of hearts blackened by greed, their creatures can be seen as hyperbolic caricatures of our meanest instincts, often violent, arrogant, and selfish. Despite the claim of a noble aim, they do not hesitate to cheat and blackmail to achieve victory. Such is the nature of a Dark Tournament. Those with emotions get crushed, and scruples are to be left behind, as there is no room for sportsmanship in a fight to the death. It isn't rare for a competitor to kill his own companions if their performance is not up to par, a tendency widespread amongst Yukai, for whom murder is not viewed as a sin. The rules fail to prohibit this behavior that the crowd appreciates so much, their existence serving to enhance the enjoyment of the spectators at the detriment of the contestants' safety, in a shonen rendition of gladiator fights. If monsters accept this status quo, the outsiders joining a Dark Tournament might not be as tolerant towards its customs. That's the case for our protagonists, who take particular offense to the screams of spectators calling for the death of those jousting for their pleasure, while sitting safely in the stands. By offering them to join the fray, they introduce an element of chaos into the proceedings of what is otherwise a well-oiled machine, but also expose their naivety. Eagerness is a necessary attribute to combat the darkness, but they are not the sole revolutionary actors on the roster, and there exist individuals with similar intentions of conquest that scarcely reveal their cards. There is some level of politics to any organization, and a contest between the most influential interest groups of the underworld is no exception. rules work in the favor of those who wrote them, and anyone bold enough to proclaim that they aim to destroy the system out loud should see that it doesn't get to them first. Dark tournaments are regulated events, and if arena rules are clearly defined, the secretive dealings of their creators lack such transparency. Those who lose die, yes, but a disqualification also counts as a loss. While the combatants battle it out, their owners call the shots, and victory is often decided by words rather than swords. Since anyone who doesn't abide by the rules forfeits their ability to participate in the rounds, focusing on preventing opposite fighters from gaining the right to step foot in the ring is a valid strategy. Fear of a guilty conscience is the only safeguard to these cheap tricks, but since the humans running the tournament are shameless, this is not a star to wish upon. Honest fighters can raise their voices all they want. At the end of the day, they are properties of their team owner, and what the boss says goes. There is only one thing that can challenge the Enkoku's supremacy: their own members. If all the power is contained in the upper sphere, what would happen if a fraction of that intelligentsia decided to rebel against its sum? Most likely, there would be change. Brutal change. The type that can only be carried by massacring the opposition. For someone rich and influential to take that step would mean risking their social and financial standing, a gamble that elites are usually hesitant to make. For such a risk to be taken, there must exist the promise of massive gains, but also the presence of a strong driving force that justifies revolting against the established order. At first glance, the motive seems to be integrity. A member of the ruling class disapproves of his colleagues' methods and dishes out sanctions to punish a dishonorable conduct. Mutinies have been enacted for way less, and any excuse is good to take when it comes to killing the opposition. The difference here is that spilling the blood of an organizer is an offense derogating entirely from the usual state of affair, as there is never any infighting between the top brass, all of their quarrels being carried out in the form of proxy wars during the tournament. The price of death is seldom paid by a human supervisor, making this assassination an act of revolution rather than a simple hit. The signs of upheaval would continue, with the spectators suffering uninterrupted assaults from the contestants. The limits of the ring no longer seem to be able to contain the fighters' struggle, and the violence that had been so well confined in the past now spills out uncontrolled, affecting everyone equally. Not only are the organizers taking the fight to one another, but now even the contestants have started to lash out in anger against the crowd, not hesitating to launch direct attacks against the same spectators whom they were entertaining just a second before. Those who can fight are suffering from the core of darkness. A not-so-innocent sentence uttered by an antagonist reveals the revolution that has been boiling underneath the surface and that threatens to plunge the dark tournaments into chaos. If its patrons aren't safe from harm anymore, then any other rule or safety measure is sure to quickly vanish, pushing the competition into a state of pure survival of the fittest, which is what it passes for in the first place. Amidst this primordial mayhem, many perish, and some strive. The organizers, blinded that they are by greed, haven't noticed that their numbers have dwindled. That, or they simply don't care, deluded by a false sense of security. They prefer to fantasize about the price of the tournament, failing to recognize that the system that was to secure this bounty for them has already fallen apart, thanks to the traitor in their ranks. His name is Sakyo, and if his team wins, he wants to open a rift. A rift between the Makai and the Ningenkai, understand between the realms of demons and humans. Such a hole already exists, but it is minuscule and closely monitored by the Enkoku, who use it to smuggle low-level Yukai into our world to serve as fighters or merchandise. They are at the origin of that breach, having perfectly understood that there was a lot of money to be made in the business of darkness. However, they also fear that opening, as the entities waiting beyond it defy our comprehension and could pose a serious threat to the perennity of their slave trade if invited in. Monsters of such great power cannot be controlled, something that Sakyo is fully aware of. He who has under his services a team of said heavy eaters, with whom he has formed a bond that far exceeds the average boss/employee relationship. To a normal person, taking the decision to let uncontrollable demons loose in the world would never cross their minds, especially if they occupy a position of absolute comfort and wealth. But this businessman is different. The luster of gold and sirens of power have lost their draw on him, and the titillation that he felt for them has turned into indifference. It is this pursuit of excitement that has led to him entering the underworld and participating in the competition with two simple goals. 1. Destroying order, and 2. Letting the entire planet turn into a macroscopic version of the Dark Tournament. The restoration of chaos is made easy by his complete disregard for sentient life, be it that of humans or monsters. This sickness has been with him since birth, but isn't indigenous to his brain. It is the natural conclusion that anyone who accesses the arcane of this world will reach, if they lack the wisdom to decipher it. In a sense, you could call it extreme nihilism, as one who considers that lives don't matter will soon reach the conclusion that life itself doesn't. Naturally, this mindset is also self-destructive. Anyone carrying this amount of darkness in them is sure to see it spill out onto their own person eventually. Once his plans fell apart, Sakyo resorted to his own destruction, along with the arena, which had been so instrumental in his scheme. His dream to see the world engulfed in darkness was not to come to fruition within his lifetime, but the seeds have been planted. If the idea to destroy the world could be born inside the spirit of a human, then synchronicity dictates that there exist other individuals somewhere with a similar aim. The Dark Tournament was no more, pulverized by the very same spirit of greed that gave it birth. The deconstruction of its false sense of order proving to be its eventual demise, as chaos returned to chaos.